Tonight, we are going to talk about time, but not in the way we usually experience it. Not as a series of urgent alerts, beeping alarms, or deadlines rushing towards us. Instead, I invite you to think of time as it once was. A vast, slow-moving river. A natural rhythm, felt but not yet captured. The gentle cycle of light and dark. The slow turning of the seasons. For most of human history, this was enough. The sun's position was the only clock you needed, and your own body's fatigue was the only alarm. But slowly, very slowly, a desire began to form, a need for a little more certainty, a quiet curiosity about how to hold the river of time in our hands, even for a moment, how to measure its flow. So, get comfortable. Settle in. Let the worries of your day recede. We are going on a journey, a quiet and patient journey, to discover the history of how we learn to measure the moments of our lives. Our story begins not with a sound, but with a shadow. Picture, if you will, a still and quiet afternoon, thousands of years ago. The sun is high and warm. A person, perhaps seeking a moment of stillness, pushes a straight stick into the ground. At first, it is just a stick, but as the minutes pass, they notice something. A dark line cast upon the earth is creeping. It is moving, as slow and certain as the sun itself. This was the first clock, the gnomon. In its simplest form, it was nothing more than a stick, its shadow a silent, creeping finger pointing to the passage of the day. It told you when noon had arrived, the moment of the shortest shadow. It could tell you that the afternoon was waning, as the shadow stretched long towards the east. It required nothing but sunlight, stillness, and patience. The ancient Egyptians, masters of stone and sun, elevated this simple principle into monuments. Their great obelisks, towering needles of granite pointing to the heavens, were not just symbols of power. They were immense public timekeepers. Imagine standing at the base of such a structure. The air is warm and dry. You can feel the heat radiating from the polished stone. You look down at the markings etched into the pavement, lines that divide the day into segments, and you watch as the obelisk's sharp, dark shadow touches one line, and then, after a long, quiet while, the next. It was a shared, communal experience. Time for the city, marked out by a giant, silent hand. The Romans, too, built grand sundials in their forums. And across the world, in countless cultures, variations of the sundial appeared. Some were small, portable devices, small bowls or tablets of wood or stone that a traveler could carry. Think of the person who used this. A merchant, perhaps, or a scholar. To use it, they would have to stop. They would have to find a level surface, orient the device correctly, and then just wait, watch. The act of checking the time was, in itself, an act of stillness, a moment of quiet observation. But the sundial had a profound and unavoidable limitation. It was a creature of the sun. When clouds gathered in the sky, the shadow would soften, blur, and vanish. The clock would cease to exist. And when the sun finally dipped below the horizon, when night fell, time became immeasurable again. A great, dark, unclocked ocean of hours until the dawn. Humanity would need to find a new way to measure the darkness. They would need a clock that did not rely on the light. They would need a new kind of flow. Listen. That is the sound of the next chapter in our story. This is the clepsydra, the water clock. Its name comes from the Greek for water thief, because it seems to steal the water, drop by patient drop. Its principle is as simple as the sundials. Water flows from one vessel into another at a mostly constant rate. By marking the level of the water in the second vessel, you could measure the passage of time. Unlike the sundial, the clepsydra worked in darkness. It worked on cloudy days. It could be brought indoors. In the law courts of ancient Athens, the clepsydra ensured fairness. A speaker was allotted a certain amount of water for his speech. When the water ran out, his time was up. You can imagine the scene. The quiet murmur of the court, the passionate speech of the orator, and underneath it all, the steady, impartial drip, drip, drip of the clock, a sound that could not be argued with. In a Roman military camp during the long, dark hours of the night, the clepsydra measured the changing of the guard. A soldier's watch was not over until the water reached a specific line, its level checked by the faint light of an oil lamp. It provided structure to the shapelessness of night. But the water clock was not content to remain simple. Engineers and inventors, particularly in China and the Islamic world, created beautifully complex water clocks. Imagine a device from the Song dynasty in China, a great tower driven by the steady flow of water filling a series of buckets on a giant wheel. This wheel turns slowly all day and night, and with each turn it operates a series of gears and levers. On the hour, a wooden figurine emerges from a door and strikes a bell. On the quarter hour, another figure might strike a drum. These were not just clocks, they were automata, mechanical wonders that brought time to life, giving it not just a measurement, but a performance. They were masterpieces of engineering, but they still had their own problems. In colder climates, the water could freeze. The flow could change with temperature and pressure. It was better than the sundial, but it was not yet perfect. The search continued for a clock that was self-contained and not reliant on the elements of sun or water. A clock that relied on a different kind of slow consumption. The next step on our journey is bathed in a warm, gentle glow. If the sundial used light and the clepsydra used water, the next generation of clocks used fire. Behold the candle clock. A simple, elegant solution. Take a candle of a standard thickness and wax quality. Down its side mark a series of evenly spaced lines. Each line represents an hour or some other unit of time. Light the wick and watch. As the candle burns, its body is slowly consumed. The flame creeps downwards, past one mark and then the next. To know the time, you simply had to look at which mark the flame had reached. Think of a monk in a medieval monastery, studying a manuscript late into the night. The only light comes from his candle clock. It illuminates his page, but it also gently reminds him of the passing hours, of how long he has until he must wake for matins, the pre-dawn prayer. The clock is also his lamp. Its gentle scent, the faint smell of beeswax, fills the small, cold stone cell. Time here is not a drip, but a warm, steady, downward melt. In the East, an even more refined method was developed, the incense clock. This was a true work of art. A tray of fine ash would be laid out. On top of this ash, a long winding trail of powdered incense was carefully stenciled. This trail of incense was designed to burn at a very slow, very precise rate. Sometimes, different sections would be made of different scents. You could, in theory, tell the time by what you smelled. 1 hour might smell of sandalwood, the next of clove. Imagine meditating in a quiet temple. The air is still. The only thing moving is the almost imperceptible glowing ember, slowly tracing its path through the incense. It's the calmest clock imaginable, a clock you experience through scent. And then there is perhaps the most iconic of these old clocks, the hourglass. 2 globes of glass, connected by a narrow neck, filled with a precise amount of fine, dry sand. Its beauty is in its symmetry and its finality. The sand flows from top to bottom, and when it is finished, the time is up. The sound is so soft, a quiet, shushing whisper. It is completely self-contained. It is not affected by clouds or by night. It does not set anything on fire. It can even work on the rocking deck of a ship. For centuries, sailors used hourglasses to measure their watches and to help calculate speed. The half-hour glass was turned again and again, marking out the day in a series of quiet, sandy cycles. Each of these clocks, the candle, the incense, the sand, marked time through slow decay, through consumption. But they were all finite. They all had to be reset. The candle had to be replaced, the incense relit, the hourglass turned over. The world was still waiting for a clock with a heartbeat of its own. For the first time in our story, the sound of the clock is not a sound of nature. It is the sound of metal, the sound of human invention. This is the sound of the verge and folioed escapement, the mechanism that made the mechanical clock possible. It appeared in Europe sometime around the late 13th century. It was born not out of a desire for minute-by-minute precision, but out of a need for order in the life of monasteries. Monks needed to pray at specific times throughout the day and night. These were the canonical hours. A sundial wouldn't work at night, and a water clock could be unreliable. They needed something better, something loud. The design was ingenious. A heavy weight, pulling on a rope, provides the power. This power wants to turn a series of gears, but the escapement stops it. It catches a gear tooth, holds it for a moment, and then lets it go, only to catch the next tooth on the other side. That back-and-forth rocking motion of the verge, regulated by the swinging foliot bar, is what created that clunk, clunk sound. It was the clock's artificial heartbeat. These first clocks were enormous. They were room-sized machines made of wrought iron. They were inaccurate, often losing or gaining a quarter of an hour or more in a day, and they didn't even have faces or hands. Their only job was to be connected to a hammer and a bell. Soon, these mechanical giants moved out of the monasteries and into the public square. They were installed in towering belfries. For the first time, time became an acoustic event for an entire town. The tolling of the bell marked the hours for everyone. The merchant, the baker, the farmer. It told you when to start your work, when to take your midday meal when the city gates would close. Life was now punctuated by the sound of this mechanical beast, a shared rhythm for the whole community. It was the beginning of a world scheduled not by the sun, but by the gear. The great iron giants in the towers told time to the city. But what about the individual? What about time that you could hold in your hand? The next great leap was not one of invention, but of miniaturization, and it was made possible by the mainspring. Instead of a heavy weight pulling on a rope, imagine a flat ribbon of steel, tightly coiled in a small barrel. As it slowly, gently unwinds, it provides the steady force needed to turn the clock's gears. The weight was gone, and with it the need for the clock to be a giant, stationary object. The first portable clocks appeared in the 15th and 16th centuries. They were masterpieces of the metalworker's art, but they were not yet precision instruments. They were the size of a large apple, often worn on a chain around the neck. They were fantastically expensive, a symbol of immense wealth and status. They were also, at first, wonderfully imprecise, and they only had one hand, the hour hand. Knowing the time to the nearest 15 minutes was considered a marvel. To hold one was to hold a piece of the future. Imagine its owner, a wealthy merchant, pulling it from his doublet, the satisfying weight of it in his palm, the faint ticking, a secret, personal heartbeat he could carry with him. For nearly 200 years, one hand was enough. The minute hand was a rare luxury until the late 17th century, after further refinements to the escapement. The second hand, that constant, sweeping reminder of every passing moment, was an even later addition, reserved for scientific instruments. With each new hand, our perception of time changed. It became more granular, more divided. Life could now be scheduled not just by the hour, but by the minute. This quiet internal evolution within the clock was reshaping the world outside. For all its progress on land, the mechanical clock had one great foe: the sea. The rocking motion of a ship, the changes in temperature and humidity, threw off the delicate balance of even the best clocks. And at sea, an accurate clock was not a luxury. It was a matter of life and death. To know your longitude, your east-west position on the vast, featureless ocean, you needed to know the precise time back at your home port. A clock that lost just a few minutes could send a ship miles off course, into rocks or ruin. This was the great scientific challenge of the 18th century. The longitude problem. And its solution is a story of quiet, obsessive craftsmanship. His name was John Harrison. He was a carpenter, not a formally trained scientist, and he dedicated his life to building a clock that could tame the sea. He did not work quickly. He worked patiently. For years, he invented new alloys of metal that didn't expand or contract so much with temperature. He used tiny jewels as bearings to reduce friction. He created a mechanism called a bimetallic strip to compensate for temperature changes. His creations, the marine chronometers, were not just clocks. They were instruments of breathtaking complexity and beauty. Every piece was crafted by hand for a single purpose: to keep perfect time no matter what. Imagine Harrison in his quiet workshop. The smell of oil and wood. The only sound the soft scratching of his file against a piece of brass, and the steady, confident beat of the chronometer he was building. It was a lifetime of patient work, culminating in a device that finally allowed humanity to reliably map its own world. He had solved the problem not with a flash of genius, but with a lifetime of slow, deliberate effort. And so our journey comes to a close. From a simple shadow cast by a stick, to the drip of water, the melt of wax, the flow of sand, the clunk of iron, the tick of a mainspring, and the silent, vibrating pulse of a quartz crystal that now powers the clocks all around us. We have captured the river of time. We have broken it into hours, minutes, seconds, and even smaller fragments. It is everywhere now, on our walls, on our wrists, in our pockets. Its beat is so constant, we often forget it is even there. But tonight, perhaps we can remember that long, slow story. That quiet, human quest to understand the passing moments. We can feel a connection to that ancient observer watching a shadow creep across the ground, to the medieval monk listening to his candle, and to the patient craftsman polishing a single tiny gear. The need to measure may have changed our world, but the time it measures, the steady, gentle forward flow of one moment into the next that remains the same. The unassuming story of the fork. Our journey takes us to the dinner table, but we are not here for the food or for the conversation. We are here for an object so common, so deeply ingrained in our daily lives, that it has become almost invisible. Take a moment to picture it. That small, familiar piece of polished metal, a handle, and 4 tines. The fork. It feels simple, obvious even, a tool perfectly suited for its task. But there was a time, for most of human history, when the very idea of placing such a thing in your mouth would have been seen as strange, ridiculous, and perhaps even a sign of moral failing. Its story is not one of a sudden, brilliant invention, but of a long, quiet, and surprisingly difficult journey. So, I invite you now to settle in. Let the complexities of your day fall away. We are going to explore the history of this unassuming utensil, from its first awkward appearance at the table, to its slow and controversial acceptance, to its final, quiet triumph. Before we can appreciate this small, familiar object, we must first travel to a time and a place where it simply did not exist. Not at the dining table, at least. Let us settle into the great hall of a medieval European castle. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke from the vast central hearth, of roasted meats, and of wine. Large wooden trestle tables are laid with coarse linen cloths, but they are mostly bare. There are no individual plates as we know them. Instead, you might see large, flat platters for serving, and thick, stale slices of bread called trenchers, used to soak up the juices of the food placed upon them. And how does one eat? With the tools nature provided, the 5 fingers of the hand. To eat in this world is a tactile experience. You feel the warmth of the meat, the texture of the bread, the slight grease on your fingertips. It is a shared communal affair. Hands reach into a central bowl or onto a shared platter to select a piece of food. Everyone has their own personal knife. This is a pointed, sharp implement brought with you to the meal. It is a multi-purpose tool. It is used to slice your portion from a larger roast, to spear a piece of meat from a platter and bring it to your trencher, and then, perhaps, to bring it to your mouth. The spoon, of course, exists for soups, for stews, for pottage, for anything that cannot be held. But for solid food, it is the hand and the knife. There is an etiquette to it, a rhythm of its own. You eat with only 3 fingers. You wipe your hands on the tablecloth or on the dogs that roam beneath the tables. There is a closeness, an intimacy with both the food and with your dining companions. The idea of needing a special tool just to lift food from your plate to your mouth would have seemed unnecessary, redundant, perhaps even a little strange. This was the way of the world. It was a world that did not know it was waiting for the fork. The form, however, was not entirely unknown. If you were to leave the great hall and venture into the kitchens, a world of intense heat, steam, and labor, you would see something that looked like an ancestor, a large, 2-pronged implement, forged of iron or bronze. This was a cooking fork, a tool of utility, not of etiquette. Imagine a cook, his face flushed from the heat of the fire, using this large, formidable tool to turn a whole spit-roasting pig, or to lift a large joint of boiled beef from a steaming cauldron, its 2 long tines providing a secure grip on the heavy, hot meat. The ancient Greeks and Romans knew this tool as well. It was a carver's implement, a servant's tool. It was strong, sharp, and entirely practical. It belonged to the world of preparation and service, not to the world of dignified consumption. It was a tool for grappling with food in its rawest, most unmanageable state. To bring such a large, spear-like object to your own mouth at the table would have been unthinkable. It was too big, too aggressive. It would have been like bringing a small pitchfork to dinner. The idea was absurd. The fork in this form was firmly on one side of a line. On the other side was the dining table, and for a very long time it seemed that line would never be crossed. The shift began, as so many subtle cultural shifts do, with a marriage and a journey. The place is Venice, around the 11th century, a nexus of trade, a city that looks both to the west and to the east. A Byzantine princess, Maria Argyropoulina, arrives to marry the son of the Venetian doge, and she brings with her the customs of her own highly sophisticated court. In her luggage, she carries a small case, and inside it, small personal forks, made of gold, dainty, with 2 elegant tines. She cannot bear to touch her food with her fingers, which she considers unclean. At the wedding feast, amidst the grandeur of Venice, she produces her strange little implement. Imagine the quiet astonishment of the Venetian nobility. They watch as this foreign princess refuses to touch her meal directly. She carefully spears a small piece of food with her golden fork and lifts it to her mouth. The act is precise, clean, and utterly alien. The reaction was not one of admiration, it was one of deep suspicion. It was seen as an affectation, a sign of decadent foreign softness, an insult to the natural way of things. The influential churchman and future saint, Peter Damian, saw her use of the fork and was horrified. He wrote of her excessive delicacy, suggesting that God, in his wisdom, had provided humanity with natural forks, our own fingers. To use an artificial metal substitute was seen as hubris, as a vanity. When the princess later died of the plague, he declared it was a just punishment from God for her decadent, fork-wielding pride. The fork had arrived at the dinner table, and it was deeply, profoundly unwelcome. It was not just a tool, it was a symbol of an offensive, almost sinful fussiness. For centuries, the fork remained a rare and suspicious object, confined to Italy, and even there, used only by a very few. But Italy, during the Renaissance, was a place of changing ideas. A new emphasis was being placed on refinement, on elegance, on personal cleanliness, and on artful living. Cortesia, or courtliness, became a subject of great importance. It was in this environment that the fork began its slow, quiet conquest. The wealthy merchant classes of Florence and Venice began to see a certain appeal. A clean tablecloth stayed cleaner when a fork was used. And a new food was growing in popularity, a food that was notoriously difficult to eat with one's fingers: pasta. Imagine trying to elegantly eat long strands of slippery pasta with your hands. It's a messy, undignified affair. The small, 2-pronged fork provided a solution. It offered control. It offered cleanliness. It began to appear more frequently in the trousseaux of noble brides and on the tables of the very wealthy. It was still an object of high status. Forks were often made of silver or gold, part of a personal traveling kit that included a knife and spoon, but the idea was beginning to take root. When Caterina de' Medici traveled from Italy to France in 1533 to marry the future King Henry II, she brought her collection of forks with her, introducing this curious Italian custom to the French court. The French, like the Venetians centuries before, were not immediately impressed. But a seed had been planted in another corner of Europe. The fork was no longer just an Italian secret. It was beginning its slow journey northward. The fork's journey across the rest of Europe was fraught with cultural resistance. Nowhere was this more apparent than in England. In the early 1600s, an English traveler named Thomas Coriat journeyed through Europe and spent a great deal of time in Italy. He was fascinated by the Italian custom of using a fork. He saw its practicality and adopted the habit himself. Upon his return to England, he enthusiastically promoted its use. His countrymen were not grateful. They were scornful. They mocked him relentlessly. They nicknamed him Furcifer, a pun on the Latin word for fork-bearer, which also meant scoundrel. To the English, the fork was a sign of effeminate, pretentious foreignness. A real man ate with his hands and his knife. The delicate, mincing motions required to use a fork were seen as unmanly. It was un-English. Plays and poems were written mocking these new Italianate customs. To use a fork was to announce that you were a fop, a pretentious traveler who thought he was better than his countrymen. The resistance was deep-seated. It was a rejection of foreign influence and a defense of a traditional, robust masculinity. The fork, this simple, unassuming tool, had become a battlefield for cultural identity. For decades, it remained an object of ridicule, the strange habit of a few eccentrics who had spent too much time abroad. So what changed? What finally allowed the fork to conquer the world? It wasn't one single thing, but a slow convergence of practical needs. The first was fashion. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, fashion became more and more elaborate. Aristocrats began wearing enormous, starched neck ruffs and extravagantly delicate lace cuffs. Eating a messy meal with your hands was a direct threat to your very expensive and difficult-to-clean clothing. The fork was no longer just about elegance. It was a practical tool for keeping your finery from being ruined. The second was a growing awareness of hygiene. While germ theory was still far in the future, there was a developing sense of cleanliness and a desire to avoid the grime of communal eating. Having your own personal set of implements felt cleaner, more civilized. And as the fork became more accepted, its form began to evolve. The two tines, good for spearing, were not very good for scooping. A third tine was added, then in France, and later in Germany and England, a fourth. The tines also began to be curved slightly upwards. This was a revolutionary change. It meant the fork could now be used to scoop up foods like peas or small morsels, making it far more versatile. It could function almost like a spoon. By the end of the 18th century, the fork was no longer a curiosity. It was a standard. It had become a necessary part of a place setting, or a cover. Factories in places like Sheffield, England, began to mass-produce them, making them available not just to the aristocracy, but to the growing middle class. It had completed its long, strange journey, from the kitchens of Rome to the suspicious courts of Venice. Through the ridicule of England, it had finally found its place on every table. It had become so common, so ordinary, that its remarkable and controversial past was entirely forgotten. It sits there now, beside your plate, quiet, humble, a tool so familiar it is almost invisible, an unassuming object holding centuries of stories in its simple, elegant form. The cleansing history of soap. We are going to explore one of the most humble and intimate objects in our daily lives, an object we reach for without thought, multiple times a day, that simple bar, resting by the sink. Feel, for a moment, the sensation, the smooth, waxy surface under your fingertips, the way it yields just slightly under warm running water, the scent that blossoms, a clean and reassuring fragrance. And then the lather, that magical transformation from a solid, quiet object into a soft, cleansing foam. We see it as a simple necessity, a basic requirement for health and comfort. But this quiet act of washing is the final chapter in a very long, very slow, and often overlooked story. It's a story that begins not with a desire for cleanliness, but with a messy accident. A story of chemistry and craft, of medicine and marketing, of religion and revolution. So I invite you now to get comfortable. Allow your breathing to slow. We are going to journey back in time to a world without soap and trace the patient, winding path that led to the simple, perfect bar we know today. Our story does not begin in a workshop or a laboratory. It begins outdoors, on the slope of a hill, under an open sky. Ancient legends from Rome tell of a place called Mount Sapo. This was a site of ritual. Animals were sacrificed to the gods here, the remains burned upon great pyres of wood. For centuries, this cycle continued. The fires burned hot. The animal fats melted and trickled down, seeping into the earth and the wood ash left behind by the flames. And then the rain came. Imagine the women of the village coming to the stream at the base of this hill to wash their clothes. As they worked the fabric in the water, they would have noticed something strange. In certain places, where the runoff from the hill gathered, the water felt different, slick, almost greasy, yet it seemed to lift the dirt from the woven threads more easily than the clear water upstream. The water frothed and foamed in a way it shouldn't. They would not have known the chemistry. They would not have known that the animal fat, the tallow, had combined with the alkaline salts in the wood ash in a process we now call saponification. They would only have known the result. This strange, slippery clay, born of fire, fat, and rain, possessed a mysterious cleansing power. This was not yet soap as we would recognize it. It was a sludge, a happy accident of ritual and weather. It was not used for the body, not yet. It was a laundry aid, a folk discovery, its secret held in the earth at the foot of a sacred mountain. The idea of purposely creating this substance for personal use was still many, long centuries away. For the early history of soap, we must leave the laundry and turn to a very different purpose: appearance. The Romans, a people obsessed with cleanliness, famously did not use soap for bathing. In their grand bathhouses, the process of getting clean was one of scraping and anointing. They would cover their bodies in fragrant oils, and then, using a curved metal tool called a strigil, they would scrape the oil, sweat, and dirt from their skin. And yet, they knew of soap. The historian Pliny the Elder wrote about it around 77 A.D., but he described it not as a Roman product, but as an invention of the Gauls, the people of ancient France. He wrote that they made it from tallow and ashes, and that they used it not for washing, but for a rather different reason. They used it to give their hair a vibrant reddish tint, and to shape it into fashionable styles. Imagine a Celtic warrior or chieftain, not bathing with soap, but rubbing this stiff, waxy substance into his long hair. It was a pomade, a styling gel, a mark of fashion and status, helping to craft a fearsome and impressive appearance. Elsewhere, it found its place not in the bathhouse, but in the textile workshop. Early soap was a powerful degreasing agent, essential for preparing raw wool for spinning and weaving. its harsh, alkaline nature could strip the natural lanolin from the fleece, leaving it clean and ready to take dye. So, for a very long time, soap occupied these two strange roles. It was a cosmetic for the hair, or a harsh industrial cleaner for wool. It was a thing of vanity, or a thing of labor. The idea of it being a gentle, soothing part of a daily personal ritual was still a concept waiting to be born. The next great leap in our story takes us away from the forests of Gaul and the hills of Rome, and into the sun-drenched courtyards and bustling souks of the Islamic Golden Age. Here, in places like Aleppo, Damascus, and Baghdad, soap-making was elevated from a crude craft into a precise and fragrant art. Arabic chemists possessed a deep understanding of the process. They refined the creation of the alkali, using lye or alkali in Arabic, which gave us our word for it. They documented recipes, perfecting the balance of ingredients. Most importantly, they replaced the harsh animal fats with gentle, fragrant vegetable oils. Olive oil, a liquid gold that grew in abundance across the Mediterranean, became the new base. Picture a soapmaker's workshop in ancient Aleppo. The air is warm and smells richly of olive and laurel oil. Huge copper cauldrons simmer slowly over low fires for days, the mixture stirred patiently with long wooden paddles. The process is slow, meditative. There is no rush. When the mixture is finally ready, it is poured into vast, shallow frames on the floor, lined with wax paper. It is left to cool and harden, turning a beautiful shade of green. After a day, it is firm enough to be cut. Men walk across the great green slab with a rake-like cutter, scoring it into individual bars. Each bar is then stamped with the maker's seal, a mark of pride and quality. These were not crude lumps. These were hard, long-lasting, beautifully scented bars of soap. They were a luxury item, traded along the Silk Roads, prized in Europe as an exotic and costly treasure. This was soap that was gentle enough for the skin, pleasant to use. The fork of this story had moved from a kitchen implement to a dining tool. Soap was finally becoming a personal cleansing article. A true bathing soap was born. The Crusaders, returning from the Middle East, brought back tales and samples of these wonderful scented soaps. Slowly, the knowledge of this refined soap-making began to filter into Europe. By the 13th century, a thriving soap industry had emerged in the cities of Castile in Spain, and in Marseille and Toulon in France. These regions had access to the two key ingredients, olive groves and the alkaline ash from salt-loving coastal plants. Soap-making became a protected and secretive trade. It was the domain of powerful guilds. The recipes, the techniques, the precise temperatures and timings, these were guarded secrets passed down from master to apprentice. To be a soap boiler, a saponarius, was to be a respected craftsman. Imagine the work. It was hard, hot, and smelly. Massive cauldrons would bubble away for days on end. The finished soap would be ladled out, cured for weeks or even months in cool, dark cellars, allowing it to harden and mellow. This soap was not for everyone. It was a luxury. It was taxed heavily by kings and lords. It was sold by apothecaries, often prescribed for skin ailments. A small bar might be a treasured possession, used sparingly, lasting for months. For the vast majority of people, soap remained an unobtainable ideal. Most made do with water, coarse linen, and perhaps a paste of bran or clay. The daily lather was still a distant dream, locked away in the secret workshops of the guilds. For centuries, this remained the state of affairs. Soap was good, but it was expensive. The bottleneck was the alkali, the wood ash or plant ash. It was labor-intensive to produce and inconsistent in quality. For soap to become an object for the masses, chemistry had to find a better way. The breakthrough came at the end of the 18th century in France. A chemist named Nicolas Leblanc developed a process to produce soda ash, a perfect, consistent alkali, from something cheap and abundant, common salt. This was not a dramatic, fiery invention. It was a complex industrial chemical process involving salt, sulfuric acid, coal, and limestone. It was dirty, smelly work, but its effect was profound. Suddenly, one of the most expensive and difficult ingredients in soap making was readily and cheaply available. The lock that had kept soap a luxury item had been picked. The Industrial Revolution was underway, and it was about to transform the soap vat into the soap factory. Now, soap could be produced on an immense scale. But just because everyone could have soap didn't mean everyone wanted it. An even bigger revolution had to happen, a revolution in the mind. That final revolution took place in the 19th century, particularly in Britain and America. It was a revolution of marketing. Two figures stand out in this quiet transformation. The first is Andrew Pearce. In his London workshop, he sought to create a new kind of soap, one that was perfectly pure, gentle, and free of the harsh impurities of common soaps. Through a long process of purifying, distilling with alcohol, and aging, he created the first transparent soap. Pear's soap wasn't just a cleaning product. It was an aesthetic object. It was beautiful. Its transparency was a powerful marketing tool, implying purity and honesty. It was famously advertised with the phrase, "Good morning. Have you used Pear's soap?" One of the first great branding slogans. The second figure was William Hesketh Lever, who, with his brother, founded Lever Brothers. Their product was Sunlight soap. But their genius was in how they sold it. They were among the first to sell soap pre-cut, wrapped in attractive branded paper. This guaranteed quality and consistency. More importantly, they sold not just a product, but an idea, an ideal. Through massive advertising campaigns, they linked their soap to a new Victorian virtue, cleanliness. To be clean was to be respectable, to be modern, to be morally upright. Cleanliness is next to godliness, became a powerful social force. Sunlight soap wasn't just for your skin, it was for a brighter home, a healthier family, and a better life. The combination of industrial production and clever marketing finally brought soap into every home. It ceased to be a luxury, an ointment, or a medicine. It became a necessity. And so, we arrive back in the present, in our own quiet bathroom. The next time you reach for that simple bar of soap, perhaps you will see it a little differently. In its smooth, unassuming form lies a history that stretches back to a sacred, smoky hill in ancient Rome. Within its lather is the echo of a Gallic warrior's vanity, the artistry of an Aleppan chemist, the secret craft of a Marseille soap boiler, and the industrious vision of a Victorian entrepreneur. It is a small monument to our long and complicated relationship with cleanliness, an object that had to wait thousands of years for chemistry, fashion, and culture to catch up with its simple, wonderful potential. It is, in the end, just a bar of soap, and that is its quiet, cleansing miracle. The quiet history of buttons and fastenings. Our story is about something small, something we handle every day without a second thought. That small, hard disc sewn onto our clothes, the button feel, for a moment, the simple mechanics of it. The gentle push through a small, reinforced slit in the fabric. The quiet little click as it settles into place. It is a perfect, unassuming piece of engineering. A humble servant that holds our world together, protecting us from the cold and giving shape to the clothes we wear. We see it as a basic, almost primitive piece of technology. But for most of human history, it did not exist in this form. Getting dressed was a very different affair, a world of tying, lacing, and pinning. The story of the button is a quiet one, a patient evolution from simple ornament to status symbol, and finally, to the silent, ubiquitous fastener we know today. So, I invite you to get comfortable. Dim the lights. Let the weight of the day drift away as we trace the long, gentle history of this small, essential object. To understand the importance of the button, we must first imagine a world without it, a world where fabric was draped and folded, not tailored and fitted. Travel back with us to ancient Greece or Rome, or to the windswept hills of early medieval Europe. A person draws a heavy woolen cloak around their shoulders to ward off the chill. How do they keep it closed? Not with a button, but with a pin. This pin was often a fibula, a beautifully crafted object of bronze or sometimes silver that functioned much like a modern safety pin. It had a pin, a catch, and a bow, which was often ornately decorated. The act of dressing was an act of pinning, of gathering the heavy fabric and piercing it, securing it in place on the shoulder. It was functional, certainly. It kept the cloak from falling off, but it did not provide a close fit. Garments were loose, flowing things, togas, tunics, cloaks. They were held in place by sashes, belts, and these essential pins. There was no long row of fasteners running down the front of a garment. The very idea of a close-fitting shirt or coat that followed the contours of the body was a sartorial dream, waiting for a technology that did not yet exist. This was a world held together by a single point of fastening. A world of drafts and drapes, a world patiently waiting for a small, reinforced hole. The shape of the button, however, did exist long before its function. In the ancient world, from the Indus Valley to China and Rome, archaeologists have found small, flat, disc-like objects made of stone or shell, often with holes carved into them. For a long time, these were assumed to be the world's oldest buttons. But there is a crucial missing piece to this puzzle: the buttonhole. These ancient discs were purely ornamental. They were sewn onto clothing as a form of decoration, much like a sequin or a bead today. They were marks of status, small flourishes of personal adornment. They had no counterpart, no little slit in the fabric to pass through. They held nothing closed. They were, in essence, mute buttons. They possessed the form, but not the voice. They were a testament to the enduring human desire to decorate our second skin. But the great leap, the simple yet revolutionary idea of pairing this disc with a dedicated opening, was still thousands of years in the future. The button, as we know it, lay dormant, an idea hiding in plain sight as a simple piece of jewelry. The true, functional button appears, quite suddenly, in 13th century Germany, and its arrival signals a complete revolution in the history of clothing. It was not so much the invention of the button itself, but the parallel invention of the buttonhole. This small, reinforced slit in the fabric was a work of genius. For the first time, it allowed for a row of fasteners to be used, creating a secure, continuous closure. And with this invention, fashion changed forever. Suddenly, Clothing no longer had to be draped or pulled over the head. It could be open all the way down the front and then closed securely. This meant garments could be tailored to be form-fitting. Clothes could cling to the torso, the arms, the waist. The loose, baggy tunic of the Dark Ages began to give way to the tightly fitted doublet and hose of the late Middle Ages and Renaissance. The button and buttonhole made modern tailoring possible. It allowed for a silhouette, a shape that was intentionally crafted to follow the human form. And as soon as this function was realized, the button's journey as a status symbol began in earnest. If one button was useful, a long row of them could be a spectacle. If the 13th century gave the button its function, the centuries that followed gave it its swagger. The button became a direct and public expression of wealth and status. This reached its zenith in the lavish courts of 17th and 18th century Europe, particularly in France. Aristocrats engaged in what can only be described as a button arms race. Buttons were no longer simple discs of bone or wood. They became miniature works of art. Imagine a French courtier preparing for a ball at Versailles. His coat and waistcoat are adorned not with a dozen buttons, but with 100, and each one is an exquisite treasure. Buttons were made from solid gold and silver. They were set with diamonds, pearls, and rubies. Some were intricately carved from ivory. Others were tiny porcelain discs, hand-painted by master artists with miniature portraits or delicate pastoral scenes. Entire sets of buttons, sometimes numbering in the hundreds, could cost more than a farmer would earn in a lifetime. They were so valuable that they were often listed as separate, significant assets in a person's last will and testament. In this world, many of the buttons weren't even functional. Long rows of them would run down sleeves and the backs of coats, existing for the sole purpose of dazzling the eye. The humble fastener had become a form of jewelry, a way to wear one's fortune on one's sleeve, quite literally. As the button became a common feature on clothing, a quiet little custom emerged, one that persists to this day. You may have even noticed it yourself. On men's clothing, the buttons are on the right. On women's clothing, they are on the left. There is no definitive written-in-stone answer for this, but the most common and logical explanation is a simple story of class and convenience. Consider the wealthy man of the era. He would, for the most part, dress himself. Since most people are right-handed, placing the buttons on the right-hand side of the garment makes the act of buttoning with one's own right hand a simple and natural motion. Now consider his wife, the wealthy noblewoman. Her clothing was far more complex. She wore layers of undergarments, corsets, and heavy gowns that were almost impossible to put on without help. She would have been dressed by a maid or a lady's maid. For a servant facing the lady, having the buttons on their right-hand side, which is the lady's left, makes the process of buttoning much easier and more efficient. The custom, therefore, is believed to be a quiet relic of a time when the wealthy did not dress themselves. And as clothing began to be mass-produced, these conventions were simply locked in place. They became the standard long after the original reasons were forgotten. It is a tiny, silent echo of a bygone social structure, one we reenact every single day when we get dressed. For a long time, high-quality buttons remained the preserve of the wealthy. But the Industrial Revolution, with its characteristic ingenuity, would change all that. New materials and new methods of production brought the button to the masses. Instead of precious metals, craftsmen turned to the beautiful materials offered by nature. Horn from cattle could be heated and pressed into strong, dark, lustrous buttons. In the coastal towns of America, factories sprang up to turn shimmering mother-of-pearl shells from freshwater mussels into iridescent white buttons by the million. Perhaps one of the most charming materials was vegetable ivory. This came from the hard, white seed of the tagua palm from South America. The nut could be carved and dyed to look almost exactly like true elephant ivory, providing an affordable and beautiful alternative. And finally, in the 20th century, came plastic, bakelite, and then other polymers, allowed for buttons of any shape, color, and size to be produced for pennies. The button had completed its journey. It had traveled from a functional necessity for the new tailored class to an extravagant jewel for the aristocracy, and now, finally, to a humble, affordable, and indispensable part of everyday clothing for everyone. Its rarity and status had vanished, replaced by a quiet, dependable ubiquity. So the next time you fasten your shirt or your coat, take a moment to feel that small, familiar object in your fingers. It is more than just a piece of plastic or shell. It is the descendant of a Roman soldier's cloak pin. It is the quiet legacy of a 13th century German tailor's brilliant idea. It holds the ghost of a French courtier's unimaginable wealth. It is a small, quiet testament to the slow and steady march of craft, fashion, and industry. An unsung hero of our wardrobe, which, for nearly 800 years, has quietly and reliably held our world together. The Secret History of Keys and Locks. We are going to explore the quiet history of one of humanity's most important and intimate inventions. It's a story contained in two small objects we handle every single day: the lock and the key. Consider that simple act: the cool weight of the key in your hand, the familiar shape of its teeth, the moment it disappears into the dark recess of the lock, seeking its partner. And then that quiet, satisfying sound, a soft click that signals a world secured, a private space made safe. It is a kind of secret handshake performed in metal. We see these objects as simple tools of utility, but their history is a long and fascinating journey of human ingenuity. It's a story about possession, privacy, and peace of mind. A story of crude wooden bars, intricate golden puzzles, and the patient pursuit of a perfect, unpickable machine. So, settle in. Allow your mind to grow quiet. We are about to unlock the long and secret history of the devices that guard our doors. To understand the lock, we must first travel to a time before it existed. A time when security was a far simpler and far heavier affair. Picture a humble early dwelling. The walls are made of mud and straw, the roof of thatch. The night is dark and full of unknown sounds. The family is inside, sleeping around a low fire. What stands between them and the world outside? Not a lock, but a barrier. The first door fastener was likely a simple wooden bar, a heavy beam set into brackets on the door frame. The sound of it being slid into place at night was the sound of safety, a deep, reassuring thud that meant the home was closed, secure. This method was effective from the inside, but what if you needed to secure the door from the outside? What if you, the owner, needed to leave? You could bar the door, but you would be trapping yourself out. A more complex problem demanded a more clever solution, a way to move that heavy bar from the other side of the door. This simple need, this fundamental problem, was the question that would give birth to the first true lock. Our journey now takes us to the warm, dry air of ancient Egypt, some 4,000 years ago. Here, in the workshops of patient carpenters, a remarkable device was born. It was the first lock to use a mechanism that is, even now, at the heart of most locks we use today, the pin tumbler. But this was a lock made entirely of wood. Imagine a large wooden bolt fitted to the inside of a door. This bolt has a series of small, loose wooden pins resting in holes on its upper surface. Above the bolt, fixed to the door, is a wooden housing with a matching set of pins that drop down by gravity, falling into the holes in the bolt and holding it firmly in place. The bolt is now locked. The key was not a small metal thing. It was a large, flat piece of wood, almost like a giant, oversized toothbrush. This key had pegs on its end that precisely matched the pattern of the pins inside the lock.
To open the door, you would insert this large wooden key into a slot. You would then lift the key upwards. Its pegs would push the pins up, lifting them clear of the bolt. Once all the pins were lifted to the correct height, the bolt was free to be slid open. The sound would have been one of wood on wood, a clattering, scraping sound. It was clumsy, it was large, but it was revolutionary. It was a secret, hidden mechanism. Only the person with the correctly shaped key, the key that knew the secret pattern of the pins, could open the door. The Romans, with their genius for engineering and metalworking, took these early ideas and forged them into something new. They replaced the clumsy wooden locks with smaller, more durable ones made of iron and bronze. And in doing so, they gave us two cornerstones of security, the warded lock and the padlock. The warded lock worked on a simpler principle than the Egyptian model. Imagine the inside of the lock is a simple maze or an obstacle course. These obstacles are called wards. The key is designed with a very specific, intricate shape. Its tip has notches and grooves cut into it, forming a pattern. To turn, the key must be able to pass all the obstacles, all the wards inside the lock. If even one part of the key's shape is wrong, it will be blocked. It cannot turn. This simple but effective design dominated locksmithing for over 1,000 years. And with it, the key itself began to change. Wealthy Romans didn't just carry their keys, they wore them. A small bronze key would often be incorporated into a finger ring. Picture a Roman merchant or senator. He wears his key on his finger. It is a symbol of his status. It proclaims that he has things of value to protect: a strongbox, a private room, a secured home. The key was not just a tool, it was a piece of jewelry, a public statement of private ownership. And for their travels along their vast, straight roads, they needed a new kind of security, a portable kind. This led to the development of the first padlocks, used to secure cargo and baggage, allowing security to travel with the person. As we move into the Middle Ages, the craft of the locksmith becomes intertwined with the craft of the blacksmith. This was an age of great ironwork, of soaring cathedrals and fortified castles, and the locks of this era reflected that. While the internal mechanics of the warded lock didn't change very much, the external appearance became a masterpiece of defensive art. Imagine a master locksmith in a dark, smoky forge, the air smelling of coal and hot iron. The sound is the steady ring of his hammer on the anvil. He is not just building a lock, he is creating a fortress in miniature. The lock case itself would be a sprawling, intricate work of art. To deter thieves, The true keyhole would be cleverly hidden amongst a dozen false ones. The lock might have multiple bolts shooting out in different directions. The key would be enormous, a heavy piece of forged iron, its head decorated like a cathedral's tracery window. These locks were a statement of power and piety, meant to guard the treasures of a church or the great doors of a castle. The artistry was a form of defense in itself, suggesting a mechanism so complex and impenetrable that one wouldn't dare try to pick it. It was security through awe and misdirection. During the Renaissance, the focus of the master locksmith shifted from sheer, intimidating size to intricate, breathtaking craftsmanship. This was the golden age of the artisan locksmith, where guilds of masters created puzzle boxes and masterpieces of mechanical art. Security moved from the great door to the private chest. Princes, merchants, and cardinals needed to protect their jewels, their coins, their secret letters, and for this, they commissioned magnificent strong boxes and caskets, fitted with locks of almost unbelievable complexity. A keyhole might be completely invisible, hidden behind a sliding secret panel that is only revealed by pressing a hidden stud. The key itself could be a work of art, with a shaft that could be unscrewed to reveal a second, smaller key inside. Turning the key might not just unlock the chest, but also trigger a small, charming surprise. A set of bells might ring out a tiny tune. A small automaton of a bird might flap its wings. These were not just locks, they were puzzles, entertainment, and objects of wonder. To be a master locksmith in this era was to be a micro-engineer, a sculptor, and a magician all at once. The lock had become a conversation piece, a treasure designed to protect other treasures. As we move into the 18th and 19th centuries, the age of science and industry, the art of the lock began to transform. The focus shifted from artistic complexity to pure mathematical security. The Industrial Revolution brought a new level of precision engineering, and with it, a new generation of brilliant locksmiths obsessed with creating the truly unpickable lock. The center of this new world was London. An English inventor named Joseph Bramah patented a lock in 1784 that was so revolutionary he placed it in the window of his shop with a challenge. A sign offered a prize of 200 guineas, a small fortune, to anyone who could design a tool to pick it. That lock sat in his window for over 60 years, a silent testament to its own perfection. Then came Jeremiah Chubb with his detector lock. This ingenious device had a special feature. If a thief tried to pick it and lifted a tumbler too high, the lock would jam. It could only be reset by using the original key, which had to be turned in the opposite direction first. The lock not only kept people out, it told you that someone had tried to get in. But the final perfecting leap came from an American, Linus Yale Jr. He studied the ancient Egyptian design and, using modern precision tools and mass production techniques, he refined the pin tumbler mechanism into the small, reliable, and affordable form we know today. His compact lock, with its small, flat key, became the global standard. The circle was complete. The ancient wooden secret of the Egyptians had been reborn, perfected through thousands of years of craft and innovation, ready to be placed on every front door in the world. And so, we arrive back at our own door, in our own quiet home. The key we hold in our hand is the direct descendant of all that history. It contains the simple genius of the Egyptian carpenter, the practical ambition of the Roman engineer, the Gothic artistry of the medieval blacksmith, and the obsessive precision of the London industrialist. The lock on our door is a silent, unassuming servant. It stands guard through the night, a piece of quiet, trustworthy machinery that separates our personal world from the world outside. Its complexity is so hidden, its reliability so complete, that we rarely give it a moment's thought. It is a small piece of metal, performing a secret handshake, letting us in, and then, with one final, gentle, reassuring click, it keeps the rest of the world out, allowing us to rest. A welcoming history of inns and taverns. Imagine, if you will, that you are on a long and weary journey. The day is ending. A cold rain has begun to fall, seeping into your clothes. The road ahead is dark and uncertain, and then you see it. Through the trees, in the deepening gloom, a single point of warm golden light. A window, a sign of shelter. That light is the promise of an ancient human institution, a place of rest for the traveler, of warmth for the cold, of company for the lonely, the inn, the tavern, the public house. It is a place so woven into the fabric of our stories and our history that we often take it for granted. But its story is a long and quiet one, tracing the evolution of travel, community, and our fundamental need for a welcoming hearth away from our own. So, I invite you now to find your own place of comfort. Settle in, and let the sounds of the outside world fade away. Tonight, we will push open the heavy door and step inside to explore the long and welcoming history of the inn. Our story begins not with a building, but with a road. And the first great road builders of the ancient world were the Romans. As their legions marched out to conquer and their administrators followed, they built an astonishing network of straight, paved roads that stitched their vast empire together. And with these roads came a new kind of traveler, the official, the messenger, the merchant. People who traveled not for a single day, but for weeks on end. They needed a place to rest. The Roman state, with its characteristic pragmatism, established official rest stops called mansiones. These were spaced roughly a day's journey apart along the major highways. A mansio was not a cozy retreat. It was a functional state-run facility, clean, orderly, and somewhat impersonal. You would present your official papers, and you would be given a room, a simple meal, and fresh horses from the stable. It was a necessary link in the great chain of imperial communication. But alongside these official stops, something else began to spring up. Private businesses called kaupone. These were the true ancestors of the inn. They were often rough, noisy places, catering to the common soldier, the wagon driver, the peddler. Picture one now. A simple, low-slung building by the side of a dusty road. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of cheap wine, lamp oil, and cooking food. The sound is of boisterous conversation in different languages, the clatter of dice on a wooden table. The proprietor, the kaupo, serves you a simple meal of bread, olives, and stew. The bed for the night is likely just a straw-stuffed mattress in a communal room. It is not luxurious, but it is shelter. It is a roof over your head and a defense against the dangers of the road at night. It is a place to rest your tired body, a simple worldly answer to the traveler's prayer.
When the Roman Empire crumbled, its great roads fell into disrepair. Travel became a dangerous and uncertain affair. For For centuries, the culture of the inn faded away. Who then would offer shelter to the weary pilgrim or the lost traveler? The answer, for a very long time, was the church. Across the landscape of early medieval Europe, monasteries became beacons of light and learning. And one of the core tenets of the Benedictine rule, which governed many of these communities, was the sacred duty of hospitality. Every guest who arrived, the rule stated, was to be welcomed as if they were Christ himself. Imagine arriving at a monastery gate at dusk. You pull a rope, and a deep bell tolls. A monk in a simple dark habit leads you not to a noisy common room, but to a quiet guest house, or hospitium. The atmosphere is one of profound peace. The air smells of beeswax from polished wood, old stone, and baking bread from the monastery's kitchens. You are given a simple but clean bed in a quiet dormitory. You are offered a portion of the monk's own simple food, a bowl of pottage, a chunk of dark bread, a mug of fresh ale brewed on the premises. There is no bill to pay. Your stay is an act of charity, an expression of faith. The sound is not of dice and laughter, but of prayer, of quiet contemplation, and the rustling of the wind in the herb garden. For centuries, these monastic houses were the primary providers of shelter for travelers, keeping the spirit of hospitality alive, not as a business, but as a sacred obligation. As Europe emerged into the later Middle Ages, the world began to move again. Pilgrims flocked in ever greater numbers to sacred shrines. Merchants and craftsmen formed guilds and traveled to distant fairs. The monastic guest houses were overwhelmed. And into this growing need stepped a new figure, the professional innkeeper. This is where the image of the classic inn, the one we know from stories and films, truly begins to take shape. Picture the sign, creaking gently in the wind, painted with a simple image, a white hart, a green dragon, a plow, for a largely illiterate clientele. You pass through a large archway into a busy courtyard. This is the heart of the inn. Horses are being unsaddled in the stables that line the walls. Carts are being unloaded. The air is alive with the smells of hay, horses, and wood smoke. You step from the courtyard into the common room. The warmth from a massive, roaring fireplace hits you instantly, a welcome relief from the outside chill. The room is a low-beamed, convivial space. Travelers of all kinds, merchants, messengers, minstrels, huddle around the fire, their damp cloaks steaming. The innkeeper, a bustling and important figure, directs you to a space at a long trestle table. You are served a hearty meal and a tankard of ale. The food is simple, but plentiful. The company is varied. News and stories from distant towns are shared over the meal, the day's journey slowly forgotten in the comforting glow of the hearth. And here we begin to see a distinction. The inn, from the French word auberge, was primarily for the traveler, offering food, drink, and lodging. The tavern, from the Latin taberna, was more for the local community. It was a place to drink, to talk, to conduct business, but it did not necessarily offer a bed for the night. Both were centers of community, but one served the road and the other the village. The next great transformation of the inn was driven by a new sound, the sound of a horn and the rumble of wheels. This was the age of the stagecoach. From the 17th to the early 19th century, coaching inns became the vital organs of a new national transport system. These were no longer simple roadside stops. They were complex, bustling operations, working to a strict timetable. Imagine the scene. The coach horn sounds in the distance, a signal that sets the entire inn into motion. Grooms run to the stables to prepare a fresh team of horses. The innkeeper and his staff stand ready at the door. The coach thunders into the yard, and its passengers, stiff and weary from hours on the bumpy road, descend. They have only a short time, perhaps half an hour, while the horses are changed. They hurry into a private parlor for a quick, hot meal. Others rush to the bar for a fortifying drink. The coaching inn had to be a model of efficiency. These inns grew in size and complexity. They had dozens of rooms, a warren of private parlors for different classes of guests, vast kitchens, and enormous stables for 100 horses or more. They were run by a whole hierarchy of staff: the innkeeper, the hostess, the ostlers who cared for the horses, the chambermaids, the potboys who served the drinks. To stay at a great coaching inn was to be a part of a dynamic, rhythmic world, a world that moved to the schedule of the rumbling coach. While the great inns served the traveler, the humble tavern or alehouse became something else. It evolved into the quiet heart of the community. In the 18th century, these places became what we might now call a third space, a place that was neither home nor work, where society could gather. This was especially true of the coffee houses of London. In these establishments, the air thick with the scent of roasted coffee beans and tobacco smoke. Men from different social classes would gather to do business, exchange news, and debate the ideas of the day. A merchant might conduct his shipping business from a specific corner of his favorite coffee house. A writer might read his latest poem aloud to a small, appreciative audience. Newspapers were shared and read aloud for those who could not read. Lloyd's Coffee House, a simple establishment on Tower Street, became the meeting place for merchants and insurers, and slowly evolved into the great insurance market. Lloyd's of London. These places were quiet engines of commerce, politics, and culture. They were public living rooms, where for the price of a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, you could participate in the conversation of the nation. It was a new kind of welcome, not just shelter from the cold, but a place to connect your own thoughts to the thoughts of the wider world. The golden age of the coaching inn came to a quiet and rather sudden end. The cause was a new and much louder sound: the shriek of a steam whistle. The arrival of the railways in the 19th century completely upended the old ways of travel. Journeys that had taken days by coach could now be completed in a matter of hours. The vast network of coaching inns, once the lifeblood of the nation, found itself bypassed, stranded. Imagine an old innkeeper standing at his door, listening not to the familiar sound of a coach horn, but to the faint, distant chuffing of a train on the new tracks miles away, a sound that signaled the end of his world. Many of these beautiful historic buildings fell into disuse. In their place, a new kind of lodging appeared: the Grand Railway Hotel. Built right next to the new city stations, these were vast, opulent, and often impersonal buildings. They offered a new kind of efficiency and luxury: private rooms with running water, uniformed staff, enormous dining rooms. But they often lacked the personal, hearth-centered warmth of the old inn. The welcome had become more formal, more anonymous. And so, we arrive in our own time. The coaching inn is a memory. The grand railway hotels have been joined by countless other kinds of accommodation. And yet the idea of the inn, the tavern, the public house, endures. The desire for a welcoming public space, for a place to find community, for a hearth that is not your own but feels like it could be. That need has never gone away. Whether it is a quiet country pub, a bustling city bar, or a cozy cafe, these places are the direct descendants of the Roman capona, the monastic guest house, and the medieval inn. They continue to offer a light in the distance for the traveler and a familiar welcome for the local. They are a quiet testament to our enduring need for shelter, for company, and for a simple, warm place to rest. The reflective history of mirrors. We are going to look into an object that looks back, an object so familiar, so integrated into our daily routine that we barely register its presence. The mirror. Each morning, we meet it. We stand before this silent, flat plane of glass and have a quiet conversation with ourselves. It is our most honest and most deceptive companion. It shows us what is, but also what we wish to see. We think of it as a simple, modern convenience. But the desire to see one's own face is as old as humanity itself. The history of the mirror is not just the story of a technology, but the story of our own self-awareness. It is a slow, quiet journey, from a trembling reflection in a dark pool of water, to a secret and dangerous art, to the clear, perfect pane that hangs on our wall. So, I invite you to find your place of rest. Let your eyes grow heavy. We are about to step through the looking glass, into the long and reflective history of the mirror. Our story begins before any object was crafted. It begins with nature's own mirror. Picture a still, dark pool of water in a forest glade, its surface as smooth and unblemished as polished glass. The air is quiet, the only sound the gentle rustle of leaves. A person, perhaps the first human to ever truly pause and look, kneels at the water's edge. They lean forward, and there, looking back, is a face. What must that moment have felt like? To see your own eyes looking back at you for the first time. The reflection is a perfect mimic, yet it is intangible. A touch shatters it into 1,000 dancing ripples. It is you, and yet it is not you. It is a twin, living in a silent, watery world just beneath your own. This was the first mirror, an unreliable, ephemeral thing, dependent on the stillness of the water and the clarity of the light. The Greeks understood its power. Their myth of Narcissus, the beautiful youth who fell in love with his own reflection and wasted away at the water's edge, is a cautionary tale about the mirror's seductive nature. It speaks to the danger and the magic of self-contemplation. For uncounted centuries, this was all there was. A fleeting image in a puddle, a river, a bowl of water held in cupped hands. To see oneself was a rare and quiet event, a gift of the natural world. The first step toward a manufactured mirror was not with glass, but with stone. A very special kind of stone, born of volcanic fire. Obsidian. Imagine a craftsman in ancient Mesoamerica. He holds a rough, dark piece of obsidian, a natural volcanic glass. It is dull and opaque, but he has discovered its secret. He begins a long and patient process of grinding and polishing. For hours, then days, he works. The motion is slow, repetitive, almost meditative. He uses fine sand and then leather, slowly abrading the surface, wearing away every imperfection. And gradually, a change occurs. The dull stone begins to gleam. The surface becomes smooth, dark, and deep. It becomes a mirror. An obsidian mirror is not like the mirrors we know. It does not offer a clear, bright reflection. It is a dark, smoky, mysterious surface. It captures a ghostly, shadowy version of yourself. Looking into an obsidian mirror is like looking into a pool of still black water. It reveals a quieter, more solemn version of your face. These mirrors were not for checking one's appearance in a casual way. They were powerful, sacred objects. They were used by priests and rulers for divination, for scrying, for looking into the spiritual world. To look into this dark glass was not to see yourself, but to see through yourself into the world of shadows and spirits. It was a tool not of vanity, but of magic. Across the world, in Egypt, Greece, and Rome, a different kind of mirror emerged. A mirror made of metal, most often of bronze. These were the first truly personal mirrors. They were small, handheld discs, painstakingly polished to a high sheen. The craftsman, a skilled metal worker, would cast a disc of bronze, an alloy of copper and tin. Then, just like the obsidian worker, he would begin the long, laborious process of polishing. A bronze mirror offered a very different reflection. Unlike the cold, dark obsidian, the reflection in polished bronze was warm, with a soft, golden hue. It was a gentle, flattering image. It did not have the harsh clarity of modern mirrors. It softened lines and smoothed imperfections. It showed you a kinder, warmer version of yourself. These mirrors were treasured possessions. The reflective side was kept protected, but the back was often an opportunity for art. The back of a Roman or Etruscan mirror would be engraved with intricate scenes from mythology, a testament to the owner's taste and education. To hold one was to hold a piece of art that also held your own face. It was an intimate object, used in the private spaces of the home. Imagine a wealthy Roman lady in her dressing room, the air fragrant with scented oils. She picks up her heavy, cool bronze mirror and gazes at her reflection, a soft, golden twin looking back at her from within the metal. The mirror was not yet a window. It was a warm, personal portrait. For more than 1,000 years, the world of mirrors was a world of polished metal. Then, in the 16th century, on the small island of Murano in the Venetian lagoon, a revolutionary secret was perfected. A secret that would give the world the first truly clear, brilliant glass mirrors. The process was complex, dangerous, and a jealously guarded monopoly of the Venetian guilds. First, the Murano glassmakers, the finest in the world, would create a sheet of flawless, crystal-clear glass. This was an art in itself. Then came the secret. A sheet of tinfoil was laid out smoothly on a stone table. Liquid mercury, quicksilver, was poured over the tin, forming a silvery, shimmering amalgam. The sheet of glass was then carefully, expertly, slid onto the surface of this liquid metal paste. Heavy weights were placed on top of the glass, squeezing out the excess mercury over many weeks. The process was incredibly toxic. The mercury vapors could sicken and kill the craftsman. It was a dangerous art. But the result was magical. The tin mercury amalgam bonded to the back of the glass, creating a reflective surface of unprecedented brightness and clarity. For the first time, a person could see themselves without the warm tint of bronze or the smoky darkness of obsidian. The reflection was almost perfect. It was stark and real. Venetian mirrors became the ultimate luxury item in Europe. They were astronomically expensive, more valuable than paintings by master artists. They were gifts between kings. The Hall of Mirrors in the Palace of Versailles, with its 357 large, brilliant mirrors, was an almost unimaginable display of power and wealth, a spectacle designed to awe and intimidate every visitor. The mirror had become the jewel of architecture. The Venetian monopoly could not last forever. For 200 years, other nations tried to steal or replicate the secret. But the true end of the mercury mirror came not from espionage, but from chemistry. In 1835, a German chemist named Justus von Liebig developed a new, safer, and far more efficient method. It involved no toxic mercury. Instead, he discovered a way to chemically deposit a microscopically thin layer of pure metallic silver directly onto the back of a pane of glass. It was like alchemy. A clear liquid was poured, a chemical reaction took place, and a perfect mirror was born. This process was a quiet revolution. It meant that high-quality, clear mirrors could be mass-produced cheaply and safely. The mirror began its journey out of the palaces and into the homes of the growing middle class. It ceased to be an object of rare luxury. It appeared on dressing tables, in hallways, over fireplaces. Small pocket mirrors became common. The ability to check one's appearance became a part of everyday life for millions. The world became more reflective in every sense. The clear, honest gaze of the silvered glass mirror began to subtly change how people saw themselves, how they presented themselves to the world. While a large part of the mirror's history is about looking inward at ourselves, a fascinating parallel story is about how we used it to look outward, into the vastness of space. The same principles that create a reflection of our face can be used to gather the faint, distant light of a star. In the 17th century, Sir Isaac Newton designed and built the first reflecting telescope. Instead of using a large glass lens to gather light, which caused colored halos around bright objects, he used a curved, polished metal mirror at the bottom of a tube. This mirror, made of a special metal alloy called speculum, would catch the starlight and focus it to a point where it could be magnified by an eyepiece. Imagine Newton in his darkened room, carefully polishing this small, curved mirror for months. His goal was not to see himself, but to see the moons of Jupiter, the rings of Saturn, the swirling clouds of a nebula billions of miles away. The mirror became the eye of science. The larger the mirror, the more light it could gather, the deeper into the universe it could see. From Newton's small handheld device to the enormous multimeter mirrors of today's great observatories, the mirror has allowed us to look back to the very dawn of time. The same object that shows us our own momentary existence also shows us the ancient history of the cosmos. And so, we return to the quiet, unassuming mirror on our own wall. It has completed its long journey, from a ripple in a forest pool, from a dark, sacred volcanic stone, from a warm, golden disk of bronze, from a poisonous and treasured Venetian secret. We now see it as a simple, functional object. We rarely stop to consider the thousands of years of human ingenuity, art, and science that live silently behind its glass. It waits patiently for us, offering its clear, cool, silent judgment each day. It is a portal to our own self, a tool for seeing who we are, who we have been, and who we might become. A simple pane of glass holding the infinite mystery of a reflection. The domesticated history of the house cat. We are going to explore the story of a creature that shares our homes, but perhaps not our history. The quiet, graceful, and profoundly independent animal that may, at this very moment, be asleep in the next room. The house cat. We think we know them. We know the weight of them curled on our lap. We know the soft rumble of their purr, a sound of pure contentment. We know their sudden bursts of energy and their long, quiet hours of contemplation in a sunbeam. They are a part of the fabric of our daily lives, a familiar and comforting presence. But in the silent gaze of a cat, there is an echo of a time before us, a time of wildness, solitude, and self-reliance. For the story of the house cat is not a simple tale of an animal tamed by humans. It is something far more mysterious. A story of a patient negotiation, a slow alliance, and an elegant bargain struck thousands of years ago. It is a story that asks a quiet, fundamental question. Did we domesticate the cat, or did the cat, in its infinite and subtle wisdom, domesticate us? So, I invite you now to settle in. Let the world outside recede. We are about to follow the velvet paw prints of this familiar stranger, back through the ages, to discover how it first stepped out of the wilderness and into our homes and our hearts. Before the hearth, there was the desert. Our journey begins not in a home, but in the arid grasslands and rocky landscapes of the ancient Near East and North Africa. Here, a small, solitary hunter moves through the twilight. This is Felis sylvestris libica, the African wildcat, the ancestor of every house cat on earth. Picture this creature, slightly larger than the cat we know, with long legs and a lean, muscular body. Its fur is a perfect camouflage, a sandy, mackerel-striped tabby pattern that blends seamlessly with the dry brush and stone. Its senses are exquisitely sharp. Its enormous eyes, with their vertical pupils, can gather the faintest light of dusk and dawn. Its ears can pivot like tiny satellites, catching the faintest rustle of a mouse in the grass. This is not a social animal. It does not live in a pack or a pride. It is a creature of solitude and territory. It hunts alone, moves alone, and rests alone. It is a perfect, self-contained engine of survival. It has no need for humans. It does not seek our company, our food, or our shelter. In its world, we are just another large, noisy animal to be avoided. For hundreds of thousands of years, our two species lived parallel lives, our paths rarely crossing in any meaningful way. We were of no use to it, and it was of no use to us. A profound change in the human story had to occur before this wild, shy creature would even consider approaching our world. That change was the dawn of agriculture. Around 10,000 years ago, in the Fertile Crescent, humanity began to shift from a nomadic, hunting and gathering life to a settled one. We learned to cultivate crops, and for the first time, we had something we had never had before. A surplus. We had granaries. Imagine an early settlement. Simple, mud-brick buildings for homes, and another building set aside as a storehouse. Inside this granary, the air is warm and dry, thick with the dusty, sweet scent of stored wheat and barley. It is a monument to human foresight, a guarantee against famine. But it is also, for another kind of creature, an irresistible invitation. Where there is stored grain, mice and rats will follow. These small rodents could devastate a community's food supply, bringing spoilage and disease. It was a serious problem for these early farmers. And then, a silent, efficient solution began to appear at the edges of the settlement. The wildcat. Drawn from the surrounding scrubland, not by the humans, but by the siren call of this new, abundant, and ridiculously easy source of prey. This was not domestication as we know it with dogs or cattle. We did not capture these cats. We did not tame them. A quiet, unspoken bargain was struck. The cats saw an opportunity for a reliable meal. The humans saw a creature that was effortlessly controlling their pest problem, protecting their precious grain stores. So, we simply tolerated their presence. They were allowed to hunt in our granaries and prowl the edges of our towns. They were a semi-wild, self-appointed security force. They lived alongside us, but not yet with us. This long period of patient coexistence was the cat's slow, deliberate interview for the role of companion. They were proving their worth on their own terms. For thousands of years, this was the relationship, a useful but distant coexistence. But in one ancient civilization, this practical alliance blossomed into something profound, an adoration that bordered on worship. This civilization was ancient Egypt. In Egypt, the cat's role as a guardian was doubly important. Not only did they protect the great grain stores that were the lifeblood of the empire, they also hunted the venomous snakes, like cobras, that lived along the fertile banks of the Nile. They were protectors of the home and the harvest. But their status soon transcended mere utility. Their grace, their mystery, their quiet self-possession resonated deeply with the Egyptian psyche. They saw in the cat a divine spirit. The goddess of the home, fertility, and protection, Bastet, was often depicted with the head of a cat. To see a mother cat gently caring for her kittens was to see the goddess made manifest. The cat became sacred. Killing a cat, even by accident, was a crime punishable by death. When a family's pet cat passed away, the entire household would go into deep mourning, shaving their eyebrows as a sign of their grief. These were not just pets. They were family members, believed to possess a divine soul. Archaeologists have uncovered vast cemeteries containing thousands upon thousands of mummified cats, each one carefully wrapped in fine linen, sometimes with a small, carved wooden mask. They were buried with bowls of milk and mummified mice to sustain them on their journey into the afterlife. In Egypt, the cat had completed an astonishing journey, from a wild hunter to a tolerated pest controller, to a living embodiment of a god. It had found its way not just into the granary, but into the temple and into the very heart of a culture. The Egyptians guarded their sacred cats jealously, but such a useful and beautiful creature could not be contained forever. The cat's next great journey would take place on the sea. The great seafaring peoples of the ancient world, the Phoenicians, the Greeks, and later the Romans, all had a common problem on their trading ships: rats. Rats would chew through ropes, gnaw on sails, and, most critically, devour the food supplies meant for the crew. Egyptian cats, likely acquired through smuggling or trade, were brought aboard these vessels as a form of furry pest control, and they were exceptionally good at their jobs. Imagine the life of a ship's cat, a world of constant, gentle motion, the scent of salt, tar, and weathered wood. By day, it might sleep on a coil of rope in the warm sun. By night, it becomes a silent, sure-footed hunter, navigating the dark, swaying holds of the ship with perfect balance. It keeps the crew safe and their food supply secure. These seafaring cats became essential members of the crew. As the ships docked in ports all across the Mediterranean and beyond, some of these cats would inevitably go ashore. They would find new granaries, new docksides, new towns teeming with prey, and they would stay. This is how the cat spread throughout Europe and Asia. It did not march with armies. It sailed with merchants. It arrived in new lands not as an invader, but as a skilled and welcome professional, disembarking at each new port and quietly making a new home for itself. The cat's fortunes, which had been rising for millennia, took a dark and sudden turn during the Middle Ages in Europe. As the Church's power grew, it sought to stamp out old pagan beliefs, and the cat, with its silent, nocturnal habits and its ancient association with pagan goddesses, became an object of deep suspicion. Its independence was seen as arrogance. Its silent watchfulness was seen as sinister. Black cats, in particular, were seen as the embodiment of evil, the familiars of witches, or even the devil in disguise. This was a time of fear and superstition. The quiet, self-possessed nature that the Egyptians had revered was now seen as proof of a dark, supernatural allegiance. For centuries, cats were persecuted, hunted, and killed. There is a tragic irony in this chapter of the cat's story. By decimating the cat population, it is believed that these medieval communities may have inadvertently worsened their own suffering. With fewer cats to control the rodent population, rats flourished. And with them, the fleas that carried the devastating plague, the Black Death. It was a terrible and cruel reversal. The very creature that had once been the guardian of the harvest was now cast out as a demon, perhaps at the very moment its protection was needed most. The cat's reputation did not recover overnight. It took centuries. But while the shadow of superstition lingered, the cat's fundamental utility could not be denied. Farmers still needed them in their barns. Millers needed them in their mills. The cat quietly went back to work, controlling vermin on the fringes of society. Its full return to grace began in the 17th and 18th centuries. Intellectuals and artists began to admire the cat for the very qualities that had once made it suspect: its independence, its cleanliness, its quiet dignity. The influential French statesman, Cardinal Richelieu, was known to adore cats, keeping dozens of them in his palaces. But the cat's final and complete return to the home was a product of the Victorian era in the 19th century. The rise of the industrial middle class created a new ideal of domestic life. The home became a cozy sanctuary, a refuge from the harsh outside world. And what better symbol of quiet, domestic comfort than a cat, sleeping peacefully by the fire? The Victorians were the first to formalize our relationship with the house cat. They organized the first cat shows, breeding cats for specific colors and traits. They wrote books and poems celebrating the cat's gentle companionship. The cat was no longer just a utility animal or a symbol of divinity. It was, for the first time for the general populace, a pet, a beloved member of the family, admired simply for being itself. And so, we have come full circle. We are back in our own quiet room with the creature that chose to join us. Its story is unique among all domesticated animals. It came to us not in chains, but by invitation, an invitation it extended to itself. It has walked through our history on its own velvet paws, by its own silent consent. It has been a god, a demon, a worker, a muse, and now it is a companion. Yet it always retains a part of itself. A small, wild spark of the solitary hunter it once was, and perhaps that is why we are so drawn to it. It shares our homes, but it owns itself. It offers its affection, but not its submission. The cat sits with us in our modern world as a quiet, living reminder of an ancient bargain. A silent conversation that began in a dusty granary 10,000 years ago and continues to this day in the gentle, rumbling purr of the familiar stranger sleeping in the sun.